There can be some confusion around self-acceptance and self-improvement. And these might appear to be not merely different approaches, but even diametrically opposed to one another. One seems to be passive, the other active. Self-improvement seems to be about making an effort to change oneself in a positive way, while self-acceptance seems to imply not changing anything at all. But are these truly opposed? Are they truly incompatible? Is one the right approach and the other wrong? Or is it all just a misunderstanding? The whole idea of self-improvement is based on the fact that we all have areas in our lives, in the way that we think and feel and behave, which could be improved. And maybe there are ways in which our thinking and behaving is causing problems or difficulties for ourselves as well as others. And perhaps more specifically, there are ways in which we suffer due to certain thoughts and behaviors. And so if we could improve in those areas, perhaps we would not suffer so much. And what other options are there anyway? Apart from improving, you can either remain stuck where you are, or things could get worse. And so naturally we tend to want to improve. But self-improvement can also have a negative side to it, in that it can accentuate or inflate certain negative beliefs that we may already hold in regard to our self-worth, such as the common belief that you're not good enough in some way or another, or perhaps in a number of ways. And there can be a lot of shame and self-judgment in that. And so we have to be watchful of this, and to recognize if underlying our desire to improve, that it may be motivated by a sense of inadequacy. Because what can happen is that these sorts of underlying beliefs can actually become the very thing which stands in our way, that prevents us from actually improving, and in some cases can cause us to feel even worse than before. One of the problems is that we set some kind of goal, or we create in our mind an image of how we would like to be, which is maybe some image of perfection. But rather than that becoming a source of inspiration, it can feed our sense of inadequacy because we never quite measure up. In the moment, as we currently are, we don't measure up to that image. And so it can reinforce the sense that we're inadequate, that we're broken or incomplete, that we're not good enough, or whatever the belief happens to be. And that belief can have a powerful influence in our lives. It can actually sabotage our attempts to improve. It can cause us to feel powerless and ineffective, or perhaps hopeless, and therefore uninspired, unmotivated, and immobilized. And so, if you really want to improve, often the place to start is to address these kinds of limiting beliefs, to improve the very way in which we perceive ourselves as we are currently. And that's where self-acceptance comes in. Now, self-acceptance doesn't negate the fact that you may have areas which are in need of improvement. It doesn't mean being inert or inactive. It doesn't mean passively resigning yourself to unhealthy habits and behaviors and making no effort to change. What it really means is dropping the judgment that we tend to have about ourselves and embracing yourself with kindness and compassion, with patience and forgiveness, knowing that you aren't perfect and that's okay. So in other words, not being hard on yourself because of it. It helps to understand that no one is perfect and that everyone has room for improvement. We're all in a process of growth. But honoring where you are in the moment is instrumental to helping you grow. I was listening to this talk by Suzanne Eder, And she said something really beautiful. She said, "The bud is not less whole than the blossom. It's just at a different stage of development." And we are not less whole when we feel unfulfilled in a certain area. We are just at a stage of development that's calling us to greater fulfillment. Another useful analogy is that of the seed. A seed contains within it all the potential of becoming a flower or a tree or whatever type of plant it happens to be. But you don't look at the seed and say that it's inadequate, that there's something wrong with it, that it's not good enough. Nor do you plant the seed one day and expect fruit the very next. Everything undergoes a process of development, and that includes you. And so self-acceptance means accepting where you are in your own development. It means recognizing that you have within you all the potential to develop, to grow, to improve, and to blossom. But you also have to honor where you are currently. And just like the seed needs to be nourished in order to grow, you also have to nourish yourself with love and with kindness, with appreciation. And you can do that by recognizing your positive qualities, your virtues, the things which you already have within you that are worthy of appreciation. And we all have positive qualities. It's just that we can spend so much time dwelling on our perceived inadequacies that we overlook them or just devalue them. So it takes a certain shift in attention. But self-acceptance is really the key to transformation. This is where it becomes a sort of paradox, that the more you accept yourself as you are, the more possibility there is for positive growth. And that growth will often occur quite naturally and effortlessly. This is because when we're not accepting of ourselves, we're in resistance to where we are. We're in resistance to those things in ourselves which need to be addressed and resolved. But as Carl Jung once famously said, what we resist persists. And the reason for that is because when we're in resistance to something, we're trying our best to avoid it, to avert our attention from it, to get away from it, or to push it away. But in order to resolve these things in ourselves, we need to understand them. And in order to understand them, we need to be able to look at them, to sit with them, and to observe how they operate. And you can't do that if you're trying to look the other way or escape. But when you can accept yourself as you are, that resistance dissolves. And that enables you to look more deeply, more honestly, with greater clarity and awareness at those things within yourself that cause you to suffer, that inhibit you, that underlie unhealthy habits and behaviors, and so on. And in understanding those things, we're able to resolve them much easier. Because in understanding them, you recognize the flaws in your limiting beliefs. You recognize the flaws in your assumptions and interpretations. You recognize the fallacy in those things, and you stop believing them. And just in that, change begins to occur all on its own. Because, for example, if you stop believing that you're incapable of doing something, it's really just that belief that's been standing in your way. And as soon as that obstacle is removed, you're free to engage. If you stop believing that you're unworthy of love, you open yourself up to receiving love. If you stop believing that you're weak, you suddenly find your strength. If you stop believing that you're stupid, you discover your capacity to learn. Most of what stands in our way is these kinds of false and limiting beliefs that we've acquired at some point, perhaps early on in our life. But once you start to examine them, to question them, you discover that they're not true. And just in that, they drop away. And once they're out of the way, things begin to improve naturally and spontaneously.